Intertextual Cardboard Experience.
Introduction. Hey everyone, it's just me for a quick second, so don't be afraid. It's not just me blabbing for a little over an hour. There's a real and really good interview coming up after this, but I just wanted to talk about a quick little change that I'm trying for this episode. So my discussion today is with Alan Emrich, so you'll get to hear all about that very shortly. But we talked about the podcast a little bit before it started and then a little bit afterwards. And he introduced this idea of kind of having an audio cue or something to kind of break up the interview and also to potentially be able to direct a listener to a certain part, either beforehand or after the fact, like, oh, I want to be able to get to this part of the conversation, and just for me to be able to kind of talk about in the episode description, what some of the different parts are kind of chunked into. So that's something I'm going to try to integrate. And I actually already recorded. I did a little bit of blabbing about me not blabbing for this full time. And, one of the things that Alan thought was, with board games, maybe, dice, cards, or something like that. And then I was thinking that, this is a story based podcast to like a good degree, getting the interviewees' stories and contributing some of mine as well, some anecdotes and just discussing. But a lot of the games that we're talking about tell stories as well, and part of the podcast is mixing mediums and everything like that. So I thought maybe something with books, having the pages turn or something along those lines. And I tried it. Uh, I want all the sounds to be from me, not trying to grab anything from anywhere else. And I couldn't get the page capture I wanted, so it's actually typing. I don't know if anybody can, decode what the letters make up. I don't know if the mechanical sound of the keyboard actually could tip anybody after that, but I guess that's for me to know, and maybe you to know at some point in the future. But nonetheless, I really liked the suggestion. I like trying new things. If you listen to my introductory episode, you know that I'm really willing to try out different things. I want this to be, an experience for the listeners. I want it to be an experience for me to learn and grow as well. So whether this is something that stays around forever, maybe it evolves or changes, or maybe even the way I do it from episode to episode is inherently going to be different. I'm all for it. I'm all for trying new things, experimenting, and just going for it. So maybe in the future it'll be like chapters or what have you. But to keep it true to what this episode is about, kind of the primary game being discussed is Nemo's War, and then a lot of other great information from Alan as well. I decided to title different chunks of our conversation as acts to keep it, like I said, to keep it true to that source material. So if you've ever played Nemo's War, you know that the game is kind of broken up into an act structure. So I thought that would be fitting here. Thanks for bearing with me for a few, and enjoy. Act 1, Setting Sail. Hello, and welcome to Intertextual Cardboard Experience. Today's guest is Alan Emrich in both the video game and board game hobbies for many years in many different capacities, and a founder of Victory Point Games. Are there any other titles that you feel like I'm missing right now?
Well, I guess the next most important thing is I'm the founder of the game conventions, the Strategicon game conventions that still run in Los Angeles to this day, 3 times a year. They're pretty big gatherings.
Wow, that is very cool. And I always, for all the guests that I talk to, I probably talked about this a couple times now. I have different connections, whether that's just through games that you design or develop. But I obviously want to do some research too, so I didn't know that, but I've definitely heard of the Strategicon, and one day when I leave the Midwest, maybe I'll get out there.
Well, that was me. I was actually in high school at the time, but I founded those conventions. So
That's super impressive. I wonder how many conventions are founded by people that are still in high school.
I went to another game convention up in Los Angeles called GLASC, the Greater Los Angeles Game Conventions. And I thought, wow, we need one of these in Orange County. And I got together with my buddy, John Myers, and he and I just became the workhorses. We found a local game club. We did everything, and we got those first OrcCon conventions, Orange County conventions, started, and the snowball went from there.
Wow. Well, congratulations. That's a very impressive feat.
When you're willfully ignorant of the impossibility of the odds, you can do just about anything.
Hey, that's definitely, I guess a positive element of being younger. A lot of times you don't think about everything that will potentially go wrong or everything that might stand in your way.
No, you just figure out where the problems are in advance as best you can and try and iron them out.
That's just a really good strategy and philosophy in general. Well, one of the things, and I'll link this in the episode's notes, is that you have a very lengthy journal entry series on Nemo's War. Nemo's War is going to be probably the game we talk about the most. That's what most of the questions about, but there are other things in here too. So the things that I have might allude to the logs or mention them, but on the whole, there's a lot there, and I don't want to necessarily just like rehash something that you wrote. So the questions will be breaking from there, and I also want people to go check them out because that was a really great read for me. And when we started our correspondence and you linked them, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be perfect. This is a great start.
I tried to compose a good story well told and leave a note in the bottle and tossed in the ocean for players of Nemo's War so they know how the game came about.
Yeah, I hope, and yeah, one of the future things, I hope people that do play the game get to see it because it is, super well written. It is a good story, and it just kind of highlights some different elements about things that people might not think about when people are creating games, and kind of those concurrent stories and those parallels and everything like that. So, okay, right before we got on air here, we briefly talked about your experience with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and just kind of want to talk about that for a second, and some of the original design and development with Chris.
All right. Chris Taylor. He is the great man from the great man theory of history. He is a giant in our hobby. His moniker is the maker of games, and he really is that. And he's a damn fine fellow. He's just as nice a person as you'd ever hope to meet on a May morning at the park. He's great. And he has got, well, in those days, young boys, and there was a children's library of classic books and stuff. One of them was Nemo's War, so he read Nemo's War and got his kids interested in it. And I think that is what inspired. He read 20,000 Leagues, and that is what inspired Nemo's War. Chris Taylor likes, among other things, war games, And so he took that piece of classic literature and knew that Victory Point games, which I founded and ran at the time, would be interested in something for its war game type audience, but he gave it a literature bent. And it was something, oh God, I'm about to say novel, at the time. And we sat there, played it. He showed me how to play it once. We kind of played it together, solitaire. And before we left the table, we had a deal for the game, handshake. That game was under development. Boom, just like that. Just like that. You won't hear that story much from other publishers, but that was true for us.
just playing the game and being like, okay, well, we want to finish the game, but we've got a deal. All right, let's
I think between the handshake and the game's release was probably a month.
Wow, that's super fantastic. That's hilarious. So I think I've either mentioned on this podcast intro, I talked about it with you for a second right before we got started, or some other episode, but a lot of the genesis for this podcast idea was, the handful of years back when I first heard about Nemo's War and really wanted to add to my gaming experience. So, and having these literary links, and so I've never read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I think for the longest time, and this is kind of funny, when I was younger, I had one of those, illustrated classics, and it was probably like a 50-page version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I'm like, oh, I've read that book before, and then I picked it up. I'm like, yeah, okay, I've never read this book before. Obviously.
Well, you learn a lot about fish, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's funny. I was wondering, that was like a future question. I actually didn't have it written. Was there any attempt to kind of like mimic the pages worth of fish classification in the game?
No. The Jules Verne did plenty with his knowledge of ichthyoids, so that's I'll leave that to the great author.
Okay. And this, okay, when it comes to, I mean, I like to read. I like to think that I have like some knowledge when it comes to novels and everything like that. But before I started research on this game more in order to talk to you, I didn't even know that that Mysterious Island as a crossover sequel, which is a pretty cool idea in general, taking a couple things that you've written, crossing them over and making a sequel for both is really neat. I didn't know it was a thing. So, and
well, keep in mind that in those days, first of all, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea wasn't a novel. It was a series of magazine articles.
Yep.
That's how people first discovered it. And so you had to pull them along week by week because the purpose of those articles was to sell magazines. So people would buy the next one and the next one just to learn what happens in the story. Second, there was no term science fiction in those days. That term had not been invented. I think H.G. Wells coined the term speculative fiction. And that's what this was, speculative fiction. So it would later get harder and become hard science in the 1920s after World War I and stuff, and science fiction. So then you have rockets and Flash Gordon and stuff.
Yeah, that's another really interesting point too about the serialization of those stories and then them being compiled into like a novel. Whether that was like the initial like intent, like you said, in order to sell like these stories in the magazines, newspapers from like a week to week basis or not, but some serialized stories are created with the intent of being like a whole later on too. And I just got done reading the first two Dune novels, and the first one was the novel, and then the second one, Messiah, was serialized too, and you can feel how that makes a story a little bit different. as well.
Well, we were blessed that 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas. Oh, that's seas plural, by the way, not sea singular.
Mhm.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea singular would take you about a third of the way to the moon. So it's seas plural. They just made a mistake when they released the English language version back in the Dark Ages. So, but anyway, the cool thing about it being serialized is that when you play Nemo's War, you can think of each card as like a chapter in a serialized story that you, the player, are playing. And so it all kind of works out, very well, stacks together very well.
And within the act structure too. So you get the little chapters, and so very, very cool. Okay, so kind of some of my thoughts answered there. Do you feel like, in development for the original, design, were there any other elements of 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas that you like tried to capture initially? I mean, obviously, but
Well, I mean, okay, if you look at the original Victory Point Games edition of the board game, you'll notice that the map is Das Welt, the world. And because it's a global game and you travel around the oceans of the whole world. So it was strategic in scope in that regard. Another thing visually was the initial deck of cards. I really wanted to create that looking out the bridge of a submarine and seeing sky, water, and land. So that, because the adventures are all sort of different that way. That's about it. That's what I tried to catch, is that you were part of this grand story, and every adventure was sky, water, and land. You saw your part in it.
yeah, very cool. So this one's a little bit lengthier lead up. So kind of moving from the original design into some further development into second edition and expansions that you designed then too. So a lot of the not new at this point, but a lot of the added materials in the game weren't necessarily found in canon. You would introduced historically researched elements as well. One of the things that I really like about the game is the subplots, characters that weren't originally in the story necessarily, events that didn't happen. I just think it brings a more well-rounded group, and it makes the world of the game have these different fun scenes that do play out in those little kind of serialized chapters and everything like that, the dramatist personae. So how did you approach those elements? Because a lot of that was you, and then what sort of balance did you try to achieve?
Well, I used to teach conceptual storytelling in college for games, right? And one thing you've noticed, 150 years after 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was written, storytelling has come a bit too, So, and really, your audience today is an audience that watches TV, binge watches series of, whatever the show is on Netflix these days. Who knows? So you need to have character, story, and plot. Those are the three things that I keep hammering on my students. And the plot is not the story. The plot is how the story is revealed. Now, in a board game, it's hard to have a fixed plot line, because then you lose replayability. The plot has got to be kind of open-ended. Things have to evolve naturally and organically, but in a way where you can connect the storylines and say, okay, our protagonist did this, and then this happened, and now they went here and they did that. That's how the cards are put together, so that the protagonist can go through adventures in varying order, and with the new adventures added, different adventures that have verisimilitude with the time and characters that are created for Nemo's.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. There's a lot of things that I had like new questions for or new thoughts about. So let me see if I can like
Ask away.
see if I can like pick those out a little bit. One of the first things that you mentioned was about new evolving audience, like how
Mhm.
the way that people consume television so quickly, or better or worse, all sorts of different things along those lines. I remember I'll go on to different forums and talk about games that I like. I think that's something I enjoy doing. But I remember one of the first times that I was talking about, it's one of those questions that pops up about which games do you think work well with their foundational text, or what stories are adapted into games well. And I think Nemo's War is one of them that's going to get brought up a lot. So I was kind of talking about my experience with both the book and the game, and I said, I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, enjoyed it. I think it's a very interesting story. There are character elements that are unraveled in mysterious and unique ways. It is kind of bogged down at times by the fish classification and other things, in my opinion.
That's Jules Verne doing his tribute to science there.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, I mentioned that I enjoyed it, but I didn't really feel the need to ever read it again. I guess maybe parts, maybe I will. Can't speak definitively. Then I think I said something along those lines, and how I enjoyed the way that these stories were introduced in Nemo's War, and that I liked that story more. Same world, different ideas, and someone's like, well, that's just really stupid, or just some kind of like dismissive response. And I'm like, well, okay.
Well, in the same way, a Greek or Roman audience would find the comedies and tragedies of the era appropriate to them, we need storytelling appropriate to us here in the 21st century now. Sorry, I spent most of my life in the 20th century, so I'm still updating my calendar. And what Jules Verne did, emphasizing science to get the speculative fiction, it was based in science, and he really tried to base things in science. I used history to base all the new cards, the expanded storylines, because with those cards, you could run to the internet and do a search. For instance, there's historical events like the Korean incident, and bat guano, and the Chinese treasure fleet, and all kinds of things that aren't in the Verne classic. But if you read about them on a card in Nemo's War now, you're going to go, oh, wow, Easter Island. It was, terrible. And then you could do a research on Easter Island and find out, oh my gosh, it really was. They lost their language. Rongo Rongo was disappearing. So I'm a history guy. So I'll throw a few historical breadcrumbs out there and see if anybody follows them back,
Oh, I like that. So, I mean, obviously, you just mentioned the tragedy of Easter Island. What's one of the historical, events or things that you included in the game that you feel, if somebody did follow those breadcrumbs back, did quick Wikipedia search, would be the most, I guess, lightheartedly entertaining search?
Well, I forget what it's called now, but it was in Sydney. It was the Industrial Fair or something. And you can just imagine the crew sneaking into this fair and seeing printing presses and you know, different kinds of farm implements and stuff, and thinking about how they could use those to affect the world. You know, it's kind of, that's an interesting thought. Of course, they had a high notoriety by then, so they had to lay low and go undercover. But I don't know, maybe Loch Ness would be fun. That was a fun one. There's a lot of fun in there. You know, come on.
Oh, I know. I agree.
Okay.
I was just, I
But
agree.
there's some serious stuff too. There's Madame Curie and the ship's plague and all kinds of stuff. So things happen, and industrial espionage was becoming a thing back then. So one of the endings is sort of an industrial espionage ending, and I thought that was pretty cool too. And I actually did a lot of research on the Kraken to get that ending right.
Okay.
So
Huh. That's really cool. Well, maybe that's something that I'll probably not dive into super hard, but do a little introductory level research
okay.
to add to my knowledge.
Like I said, historical breadcrumbs are everywhere on the new cards that were added since the original Nemo's War came out. Chris Taylor got to use the chapters as titles for the cards, the original Nemo's War. But those chapters were pretty well gone by the time we said we need more material. So it's like, okay, let's fix a date. And I picked 1870, and every event is 1870 related, give or take just a teeny bit. So
like, that's interesting and neat. You know, a lot of the, you know, way that I approached, you know, the game and trying to like enrich my experience was through, you know, reading, you know, the story, but having that historical element as well. All these events that were based on, you know, real events can only add to it even more.
or with like the Paleosaurus graveyard off of Northern California, that's a real thing. And those waters are really treacherous, and they knew that back then. A lot of ships stayed away from there because of the fog and rough waters. But that's a great card. They were actually building a lighthouse to help save some of those ships in 1870, and it was nearing completion. So I referenced that in the card. So you're going to learn some stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, there's maybe things that I learned through playing it that I didn't even realize I learned, but I'll have to keep going.
And that's the best way. Learning without realizing it, you've learned.
You got tricked. Thought you were playing a game.
That's the best part of education, is where you can piece it together for yourself and say, huh, I wonder, and just pick up a book or hit the internet and find out.
No, I love that. I mean, you know, it's just one of my favorite games in general. And now I feel like going through it more and more that I have more things that I can do with it. And I like that a lot. Act 2, taking over the helm. So I mentioned the journals at the beginning, but we'll go back to them just for a couple things. I thought they were an absolute delight to read. I think that, you know, design logs, especially ones with the scope that yours have, you know, are enjoyable. And I just said enriching, but enriching as well. Games can tell stories, but I think a weird and interesting things about art, stories that people create, that they're all loaded with the stories of the creators, and then the consumer oftentimes doesn't get to see that. I think especially starting in, you know, the chapter 1 of your logs is a very powerful journey, and I don't want to spoil that experience for anybody who hasn't read. But what's I guess a really fun part overall, and I said fun before with one of the other questions, but just highlighting like a fun, interesting part of that story, either in the logs or out, that you feel highlight some of the successes of the game's development.
Well, it's pretty crass commercial enterprise at first. I mean, we were making a game and we were going to sell it. But Chris made the game with love. Again, 20,000 Leagues Under the Seas is something he shared with his kids, and he wanted to share that through the game. And so we totally, respected the designer's outlook, the designer's intent, the designer's feelings. And this is why I was so moved when we did a second edition that Chris said, I don't have time for second editions, but I know you will do it right, Alan. I believe in you. I trust you. And that was a very life-changing moment for yours truly. So that was pretty big. Yeah, there's a lot of stories, and again, I wrote them all up, but I'm happy that the book is closed. That this is a good, the last chapter's written, the book is closed. Short of doing something crazy like a prequel game, but I would need Chris Taylor for that. Without his heart and soul and passion, it just wouldn't be the right game.
Yeah, that's fair. On that note, reading your notes about a prequel game, that sounds very fun.
Well, yeah, I got it kind of mapped out and written up and how things might work, and the mechanics and systems I can help polish, but like I said, Chris has got the heart and soul to flesh that out, and there will probably be new characters and ways to look at the design and stuff that Chris would see that I wouldn't, and this is why I love to collaborate on games so much as like to design them myself. I'm not a designer, I'm a developer. Not too many people want to be a developer. That's pretty thankless job, but I like it because it interests me. So
yeah, I think that's another interesting point that you brought up. Like earlier in the hobby too, I mean, you see designers' names attached to games, obviously, like and developers maybe not as much, but you go deeper down, you look at the credits for a game, and then you see the different developers, artists, and the full credits. Hopefully, not all games have full credits.
But it sure didn't start that way. That's a more recent invention in my lifetime.
Yeah, but yeah, I just in general, I have a little bit more of grasp on developers. Obviously, I don't, because I've never done it, so I don't think it's one of those things in general. You don't know it until you do it. But no, that's something that I have enjoyed getting to know more of, but definitely would like to know more too. Very cool. So okay, kind of the story of Nemo's War, if I were going to say the game's history, about 15 years now, right?
I guess. Yeah.
So that's a pretty long time. So having the Nemo's Wars ship logs, trying to tell that whole story. Do you feel like there are any other projects that you've worked on or developed that you could have this extensive of a story about, or is this the game?
So many of the games I've worked on have a story like that. I'll tell you, Dawn of the Zeds, which is another great story-driven game. It takes the zombie apocalypse milieu and writes it at a scale that is operational in scope. It's not strategic where the whole world is going. It's not tactical where you're on a city block peering through a sniper scope. It is operational. There is a town outlying villages, and you're responsible for that area in the zombie apocalypse. Every card is a trope like you've seen on TV or in the movies or whatever. and you can see how the stories connect. The cards are also built by acts, and with rising action, and then a big dramatic ending where the zombies are going to come this close. In fact, most solitaire games you should lose. Things have to go right. You have to make right decisions, and you need a slice of luck to win. You got to go in with the plan to up your odds, but you should expect to lose. If you didn't, there wouldn't be much of a game. You lose interest in it pretty quick. Oh yeah, I can beat that. That's like solving a puzzle. I did that. Leave that in the box. So Dawn of the Zeds is one. Oh my gosh, I'm working on a giant war game that takes 10 tables to house the map charts and other paraphernalia. And that's a serial. I'm still working on that. This has been, about the same 15 years. So, yeah, a lot of games have stories like that, and they're all kind of interesting. And I guess I'll be taking those with me. But I left that one note in a bottle for Nemo's work that people can go read and hopefully be entertained.
Yeah, I would assume. I can't imagine anybody going to those and not, having that whole range of emotions that you put into it. So I really appreciated that, and just kind of knowing that your other development work and projects have those similar stories, and I think that's hopefully something that people take away too. Okay, so in the diaries you mentioned it here as well, that Victory Point Games primarily, especially early on, was producing war games, and then you also Nemo's War and Dawn of the Zeds and others broke from that a bit. Do you think that any other novels? Well, obviously we mentioned that initially 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is not novel, but stories, classic or not, that you feel would work well for a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea to Nemo's War type of adaptation?
Well, Dune has been adapted a few times into a game, but when you write a story of the scope of, like, I don't know, Star Wars or Dune or something that's vast, there's two games. There's the strategy game of locations and conquest and production and economics and politics, and then there's the up close and personal game, characters, story, or characters, vehicles, and items. Okay. And one thing I haven't gotten from the Dune games yet is a real feeling of characters, vehicles, and items. And I'm thinking that's probably a card-driven mechanic so that you can put in the narrative text and create the stories around them. But the way the novels are written, Star Wars novels, Dune novels, Lord of the Rings, whatever, they've got the huge scope story and the small personal story. And most of the board games can look at the large scope, but they haven't managed to integrate the small scope elements of character, of characters, vehicles, and items. That has to happen somewhere. That's because that's the modern audience. They want both the grand scope, or at least where their characters, vehicles, and items fit in the grand scope, but they want that personal, I'm feeling the emotion, I'm feeling the pain, the fatigue, whatever it is, of these characters, which authors do, but board game makers, computer game makers don't always. So there's two stories. You got to tell two tales in those. The big one and the little one.
I like that. I'm trying to, you mentioned that, I'm trying to envision what that, more narrative focused Dune could be.
Oh, well, each house, each faction, the Bene Gesserit, the Gesserit, the Harkonnens, the Atreides, the Royal House, whose name I forget now, um, the Guild, all of these factions in Dune should probably have characters, vehicles, and items that you can use to help resolve the overarching strategic story. And they can interact, they can go on small adventures to improve the situations for their things. You know, there's a way to play that between what I'll call a strategic cycle of the overarching storyline, and you can work in small storylines to help adjust to influence the overarching story. Now, that's crazy talk because I've done things like that, and it's a lot of work, and it's not always appreciated. In fact, it's often nitpicked in reviews and whatnot, but that doesn't mean it is less ideal for that.
Oh, I agree. And what I meant that I was trying to like imagine it, I wasn't saying that I didn't think it was possible. I was just trying to think like how I would approach it. And then you came back with your approach and it was much more grand and impressive than what I was thinking in my
Thanks. This is a road I've been down a few times. So
head. Well, I like that road. Act 3, 28 games in a year and a 10-table game. Neat. We've talked about, well, obviously Nemo's War, Dawn of the Zeds a bit. Kind of going back, you know, this is like a little Wikipedia snippet that I'm grabbing from, so you can correct anything here. But, you know, initially with Victory Point games, a lot of that vision of like accessibility, both in production and ability to design, and the hope of allowing students, you know, you mentioned like your teaching, to learn that process and be a part of that process sooner, easier, was one of the goals. So I guess what's, you know, a lesser known game, and I'm sure there's a whole bunch from these kind of earlier days that aren't a couple of the more well-known ones that you wish more people knew about?
oh my gosh. I would literally have to go through my library. We did over 100 games. There's probably 100 and a score games that we did at Victory Point Games. So those were busy times. I mean, one year I released 20, wait a minute, don't tell me, 28 new products myself and my buddy Vinny, who manufactured, but I had to do all the development work, lay out all the rules, and do all the graphics and everything else, and get them ready to release, and do the website, and fill the orders. Okay, that was me. And 28 in 1 year, I think, is a record for any game company. So that was crazy. Now, we didn't have to send things overseas to be printed or anything like that. We did everything in house. It was all under our control, so we could do that, and we did do that. That was crazy. So we did some pretty clever little games, but I don't know which ones I would recommend.
Okay, that's fair.
They're all my children, you know.
Yeah, you can't pick a favorite of that. That is fair. I was just curious if there was, you know, like I said, any. Yeah, again, hundreds. It is tough. If there's anything that you're like, this could have or should have, you know, broke out more, I guess that was just thought, but.
Well, Nemo's War was one of those games I thought should have broken out more, and ultimately and eventually it did. So
cool. Well, yeah, and you know, I think, you know, design in general does offer those unique opportunities for people to go back and find things that were, you know, design published and everything like that, to like see like, wow, this is a mechanic or this is a story that I really like, and it can get, you know, iterated upon, get those second editions and everything like that as well. Well, I'll definitely kind of dive into that whole catalog. I'll try to take a look at of the year of the 28 and see those games too.
Okay, there's a lot of them. One good thing about creating games with a lot of story is when you get a copyright, it copyrights the way the story's told, but you can't copyright game mechanics. Mechanics anybody can use, but the way you tell the story, you actually get some protection from your copyright. So, yay!
That's good. I mean, you want people's work to be protected as much as possible.
Right.
Cool. Okay, you mentioned it earlier that you were, well, when we were talking about something that you could, but won't, write a lengthy diary about is your current development project, the 10 table game.
Yes.
Is there
Right.
anything more that you like want to talk about with that? I'm pretty unfamiliar. I kind of maybe saw a little bit about it, but
It's called Frank Chadwick's European Theater of Operations. It is World War II in Europe. It is done at a grand scope and scale. For wargamers out there, it is a core level, weekly turned game at about 50 miles a hex, a space where the pieces live. It's just huge. And Frank Chadwick is the guy. Frank Chadwick is the guy back in like 1972 came up with the Europa series of games with Dragna Holsten and that series. I guess you might think of this as a second bite at the apple, but it's much more streamlined. If you're a war gamer, this is a player's game. You know, you can break it out and just start pushing pieces around and having a good time. So, but it's vast, and because it's vast, there's a lot of synapses, and I got to make sure all the rules connect right and help out with, you know, the order of battle. Each game piece has a story about its entry and its exits and things like that the players write. We know the history, and because we offer scenarios, smaller games within the game that start at different time periods, we have to know where all of those actors, all of those game units are on 22 June 1941 when Russia is invaded or something. You know, we have to know that, and we've done a great job. Frank Chadwick is the order of battle guy. He knows the history. You know, I kind of help with the systems and mechanics. We've got a lead playtester with Jay Johnson and a Vassal guy and Ken Keller. And we have got this great team assembled. Just amazing. But that's me waxing about a war game, and I don't know how interested your listeners are in hearing about a war game. So sorry, guys.
Hey, I'm interested, and okay. So I mean, you know, chalk this one up to the 10 million things that like I wish I kind of, you know, had time to do more of. I can't call myself a war gamer.
Mhm.
I definitely have some war games and or historical ones that they're actually, well, listeners can't see, but in that chest behind me, it's my
Sure.
war chest.
Mhm.
But no, I am extremely like fascinated by them. I think, you know, as you said, the history is there.
Right.
Like it exists. So you can go back and you could look at it in I don't even know how many different ways, how many different texts, you know, are able to, you know, report on the stories and everything like that. But I think, you know, much in the similar way that like a game that is developed from like the source material of like a book or like a story, you know, the more work you do, and I think the scope of history is like even more broad than that. So maybe that's what's like daunting to me. that you could never stop like reading about something. So maybe
Right.
it's like a personal holdup. But I guess long story short, I'm interested.
Well, there's good history games for what I call Euro gamers out there. So like Julius Caesar from Columbia Games up in Canada. It's a nice little wooden block game, you know, with your like hidden movement and stuff. And it's a real simple game, but boy, you get a sense of capital H history, and it gives you things to look up and gives you things to be curious about. And it's well done. It's it's great. It's a step up from Stratego, but you will pick up capital H history and want to look it up.
Okay. Who made that game again, did you say?
Uh, Columbia Games, I believe.
Okay.
It's big on Board Game Geek, but Julius Caesar. It covers the Roman Civil War
Hmm.
between Gaius Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus. It's again big scope, you know, got the whole Mediterranean, you know, big pieces. So the beautiful thing about strategic games is you can abstract more and work less in the rules and stuff learning it. Whereas tactical games where it gets sweaty and personal and man to man, you're literally counting bullets and bites and things like that. And there's a lot of rules that go with more tactical. More strategic, you can simplify, you can
Okay.
abstract.
Cool. Well, I was able to pull this one up, and I'm very intrigued. I guess that's going to be a downfall of having this project. I'm just going to get introduced to more games that.
Well, I'm trying to recommend games that are very accessible and extremely fun and high replayability. So Julius Caesar, I can totally recommend.
Okay. Well, I am probably going to definitely run with that recommendation.
Okay.
I'm gonna find myself one. Act 4, 4x, and 5x. I have a two-part question.
Hmm.
So again, just a little surface level research. You are the person that is credited with coining the term 4x.
Yes, I am.
So part one, do you feel like there are any games, video, or board games that have stuck out to you in recent years by doing something interesting or unique as a 4x game?
This is gonna hurt. I don't play as many games because I work on so many games. I tend to not lose track of my time. If I started, okay, look, if I did what most people do and started playing games like on my computer or the weekend game club or whatever, I wouldn't be developing games nearly as much as I need to. I feel I need to. So I don't go stomping around tracking down 4X games. I did add a 5X, and we've been discussing that. And that's the experience of the game. And that's where you get down into more story-driven aspects, more characters, items, vehicles, you know, things that people can relate to in a big scope game. So to me, that's the 5X. That's the missing thing is the experience you have either being a leader at that strategic level or manning those small groups, those small teams that you would read about in a novel that carried the day and achieved this and change the course of, you know, so yeah.
Awesome. I really like that 5X, and I'm going to I'll be on the lookout for games that really try to introduce
Create
that.
the
Or
experience. They're not just, you know, abstract 4X games that you really feel like you're the galactic emperor or whatever. They put you in those shoes and you have to talk to those people and you have to arrange things great and small. Like, I'm sure the CCP is fighting its destiny on multiple levels, and it does things at the very small scale and the very largest scale. And they have a 100-year outlook because that's just the way Chinese thinking works. You know, they've read Sun Tzu, where like a lot of our guys haven't read Sun Tzu and don't know that war is based on deception and blah, 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 that Sun Tzu teaches us. So, but the Chinese know it. They're doing modern warfare in the guise of Sun Tzu's Art of War.
All right, this is so part two to that question, and actually kind of the second to last thing that I have queued up for us. But this is reflecting on legacy a little bit. So I would feel as if, you know, you kind of chuckled when I mentioned that you were the person who is known as creating the term 4X. And that's, I mean, that's an extremely impressive thing. I think that's like as an accomplishment, as a contribution to, gaming, both video and board games, is something that if somebody had done, that'd be like a really, I don't know if like hang your hat worthy type of is like the phrase I'm looking for.
I could sure use it, huh?
But I guess, like I said, so the legacy element. So what ways or what things overall do you want to be most remembered for in either or both the video game and board gaming hobbies?
I think the more I disappear after I'm gone and new generations can pick things up, the better. They don't need to worry about me. They don't need to worry about my contributions. My contributions are out there. They can do with them what they will. My story is mine, and if anybody finds it and it's inspired or interested or anything, that's fine too. But I'm not out legacy building. My legacy is the works I've done, and people can study those.
That's great. Awesome. Well, I mean, I definitely I can respect that sentiment. I think people will find the things that you've done and look to them for, inspiration and everything like that too. Okay, so
Well, my life was standing on the shoulders of giants. If people think that my shoulders are worth standing on, then God love them. Stand away. Let's get it done.
I think that will happen. Act 5, Finalés D and E. My final question is always kind of this broad text of note question. So is there anything that you've been, you said you don't really play as much because you're developing so much, but playing, watching, reading, listening to, or engaging with in some way that has stuck out to you or that has stuck with you?
Well, I'm going to turn around and look back at my game collection. Yeah, there's a lot more projects I'd like to get to and finish and put polish on. I have in mind the most commercially successful game that I can think to publish, but I'm not a publisher anymore. But I know that this game will hit all the right notes to as many players as possible and all ages. And it'll be great. If I ever get back into that, this is the game I'm going to make. But it's a secret.
Okay.
But I know what it is. And I'm going to give it to myself because I think I'm the right person to do it. It's a great idea. And I think I'm the right person to do it. Yep. So I'm going to hold on to that. You don't get to know that.
Okay.
It's my secret. But yeah, novels, no, nothing. just put a game in front of me and let me develop it.
Okay, so that's just kind of been the life, is just seeing the game. So that every text in your life has been that game that you're developing.
You know, in the book biz, there are authors. And honestly, just like every backseat driver knows that they can drive, every reader knows that they can author. You know, they feel that they can be an author. But to me, being the editor is really cool because you get to role play that author and help them clarify and put the right visualizations and explorations in their thing, and to ask them questions about things and try and elicit refinements, improvements. I like that. Not too many people would want to be an editor. Most editors have failed authors, but then so are most authors. But you know, that's the thing I like, is to bring out the best in my students, the best in my game designers. One of the most prolific game designers on the planet today is a guy named Joe Miranda. Joe Miranda makes mostly war games, but he, you know, gets like 6 or 8 published a year, all right, and has for decades. And when we were doing some Joe Miranda games at Victory Point Games, he knew that, you know, that he could unroll the paper and just go off the edges and drive here, there, and everywhere and be wackadoodle crazy with his designs. And he's a good friend. We met, you know, at lunch, and I said, you know, Joe, the best games you make are the really small, tight games, the little games where your big ideas are synthesized and boiled down, and it's just that great nugget that players can play with, rather than exploring it all the way out to the edges of the universe. That nugget is what they want to play with. That, not gold dust, gold nugget. And I looked at him, and I remember he's a friend. I said, we get the best of Joe Miranda when we get the least of Joe Miranda. Small games are where you are really great. And that was not an insult or anything. That was just like the editor's job. And he really appreciated, well, a few people did. He's not the only one. He appreciated me as a developer, because I would take their ideas and I would synthesize them and present them and make an attractive package idea and marketing around it and things like that, that took their idea. Like Zulus on the Ramparts is a great little solitaire game we did on the Battle of Rorke's Drift in 1879, January. And Joe had an idea that was just done on white sheets of paper. There was no board, no prototype, no nothing. The cards, everything was just printed out as text on paper. And yet that was one of our most successful games. And if you ask Joe today, I think he would tell you that it's because it was so well developed. And that's my contribution. So I made sure we had all the characters and we told all the stories, and that the history was there. It's capital H history, supplementing that game in its cards and systems and stuff. You really did learn about the situation and the evolving story for the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Yay!
I think that's great. And I also think just knowing the type of writing that I do write, whether it's like a story or some of my lengthier projects, which don't exist in the real world because I think they're in need of an editor or a developer like you. Let's just put it that way.
The stuff I do is a lot more drudgery than glory, as the dean of board games, James F. Dunnigan, said. Rules writing is more drudgery than glory. Well, all development is, all editing and synthesizing and boiling it down into a successful marketable product is more drudgery than glory. But you know, that's what I like doing. So
well,
maybe I've gotten okay at it after all these years.
Yeah, just okay after all these years. Epilogue. Explore, motive, triumph. Wow. Well, I appreciate that you are one of the people that goes through that drudgery. I really appreciate you doing all of that work on and one of my favorite games. I mean, non-hyperbolic. I love it. And especially more and more, well, not more and more, it is capped, but with all the expansion materials that have been added, I think it's at a really good balance of, replayability, modularity, without being, too tricky to navigate. Like I think
Right.
it's just in a really cool spot.
Thanks. Nemo's War was a great game to initially develop. When we first published it, I wish we had more time to get more things right. When we did the second edition, we took that time, and then we took extra time to let Ian O'Toole make it look like the greatest game that ever hit the store shelves. And boy, did he outdo himself. So everything came together. It was the stars lining up. It just turned out great. And then when more material was needed, I said, well, okay, let me think about all the material I could have. Let me scratch out all the material that's probably not a material. And this is what's left. And that's what's got published in the, Ultimate Edition or whatever they called it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't market that. But yeah, the final voyage. There we go.
I think, I mentioned that I didn't want to talk about all the elements of your ship logs because, well, they exist, and I wanted to ask questions based on them, not at them, I guess. But how Ian got involved in the project, that chapter that is wild. It is so, I mean, it's perfect, like you said. The way that it happened, the time that it kind of obviously took for him to create every art asset.
Oh my goodness.
That game.
Yeah, no, Ian O'Toole is a mensch. Our hobby owes so much to him. He has done such an outstanding job making us look good and be presentable and appeal to the mass market. God bless you, Ian O'Toole.
Yeah. And I'm not just saying that I love his art and graphic design. I mean, everything that he does helps players, and that's fantastic. And I'm not just saying this. I think Nemo's War is it. It is a masterpiece.
Like I said, he hit it out of the park, and I was too embarrassed to publish it as we had intended to. After I saw his art, I said, we got to up our game. We got to be at least as good as Ian now. He raised all the stakes.
Oh.
So yeah, that was read the story. It was stormy weather at Victory Point Games for a while there.
Yes, to anybody listening to this, definitely read it. It's worth your time. Okay, speaking of time, thank you so much
Ryan.
For yours.
Okay.
I really enjoyed our talk.
And I'll be here. Remember that I used to teach game design and project management and all these things. So really, I have a very thought out, philosophy-based approach to things. And if you ever want to explore that more, that might be a subject for our next discussion.
I would absolutely love that.
Okay.
For sure. And honestly, I'll reach out to you. I'll ask you for some ideas because that's not something I'm super versed in.
The neat thing about that is a gamer who is an enthusiast about games is going to learn what kind of design philosophies were used, how systems and mechanics work and evolve, what kind of things you think about when you create a game, because those thoughts, those lessons turn the gamer into the designer. Just like everybody who reads a novel has a great American novel or whatever, ready to burst out of them. Once you learn those design skills, once you're aware of them even, then you can start to make your own designs And the paper is not just something to read, the paper becomes something to write on. So,
All right. Well, I think when I say that this conversation was fantastic, it's fantastic because of everything that you said.
thank
And
you.
now I've got another one already lined up. So,
Okay, I'll
well,
be here for you, Ryan.
all right. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Right, and thank you everybody for listening.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Intertextual Cardboard Experience. Feel free to reach out via email, which is bodthepod@gmail.com, or check out my Instagram with the same name. There's not much on there right now, but I'm looking forward to working on the Instagram and other forms of social media and a website a little bit more in the future. Until then, keep playing, watching, reading, listening, experiencing. Thank you.